On tonight's episode, we have a person who was in podcasting for almost 20 years, an award-winning Hall of Fame podcaster. I'm talking about Dave Jackson. Stay tuned.
Welcome to Talking Junk.
I'm your host, Jason Melendez.
Live now every week on Fridays.
Talking Junk.
A multitude of professionals in different aspects, different walks of life.
You have to come on and talk junk like a normal person.
And there we go. We are not without our mess ups, and you guys already know that. Like I said, this is Talking Junk, and this is the podcast that comes to you live every Friday night from Twitch, Twitter, YouTube, and Facebook. I am your host, Jason, and like I said a little while ago, we have a great guest for you tonight. If you ever wondered how we kick off even getting the idea of starting one of these podcasts, this is the man for you. He has almost 20 years in podcasting. He's done a bunch of different podcasts, hours upon hours. He's an award-winning. Now, I didn't even know you can win awards for podcasting up until recently, but he's done it all. Let's just get right to it. How you doing, Dave?
Oh man, glad to be here. Ready to have some fun. Talk some junk.
Yeah, we can talk as much junk as you want. Now, you can speak freely, you can cuss, you can, be yourself.
All right, looking forward to it.
Now, one thing I'm not gonna do is ask you to tell me a little bit about yourself. But almost 20. You're around 3 years shy of 20.
Yeah.
Am I right?
Yeah, back in 2005 is when I started, so it's crazy.
It's a long time in podcasting.
Yeah, and the first 3 years were just brutal because I had discovered it and I could see the potential, but I would go up to people and I would say, I heard something on a podcast or whatever, and they're like, "What's a podcast?" And then
Back then it was more like internet radio.
Yeah, and at the time when the iPod came out, everybody I would say, "Oh, do you listen to podcasts?" They're like, "Oh, I don't have an iPod." I'm like, "You don't need an iPod. You just need a computer, the internet, and some speakers, And so it was just brutal. And that's why there were certain waves that came along. Like the first wave was all the nerds because they were the only people that could figure out how to make one. And so there were nerds, and then there was another wave of people that finally figured it out, and it was all about like a lot of how to learn to speak English and how to speak Spanish, like language podcast took off. And then we had the comedians come in. You had the Mark Marons and the Adam Carollas of the world, and Ricky Gervais was one of the first guys that was really into podcasting. And then, fast forward a couple more years and you get into the whole serial, and that's still going gangbusters, and the whole true crime now. It's like, it's funny to see how podcasting has now influenced other mediums, because I turn on Netflix and everything now is true crime sports, true crime cooking. It's like, wait, what? How do you do true crime cooking?
A lot of the sitcoms, the kids, or sometimes the main antagonist is a podcaster. So
yeah. So it's always, and then the podcasters watch and we all pick it apart. Like, wait, he's holding that microphone wrong. That's not, we pick it apart, or we get excited. I know there was one of the Marvel shows, and the woman was actually using a Rodecaster, and like the next day in all the Facebook groups, everybody catch the Rodecaster on that show last night. So it's a fun group.
Well, I know me and my wife were watching Ghostbusters Afterlife,
Mm-hmm.
and the kid in there has like a portable rig on him with
Nice.
the mic coming out of his belt and everything. I'm like, I gotta get one of those. You know what I mean?
That's it. Yeah. Well,
Now,
that's the other thing that's come along. I mean, now, I got in my hand here a Zoom PodTrack P4. This thing's a little over $200. And if I went back 4 or 5 years ago, this was $1,000, and it was probably twice the size of this. This thing's the size, for those of us that remember what a checkbook looks like, this is about the size of a checkbook. And you can plug 4 mics into it. It works as a recorder and a USB interface. You can play little jingles on it if you want to do things live. It's crazy. And so it's fun to see technology. StreamYard is another great example of something that's just making it easier when people go, oh, wait, there's an audience for this. Let's see what happens now. And so it's a lot of fun to see things getting easier and easier.
right. Well, nowadays, let's be honest, there's an audience for everything.
Absolutely. Whether it's living with herpes, there is the chameleon breeder. That's another one that I was like, wait, what? You breed chameleons? He goes, yep. And I go, wow, that's, and I used to joke about, like a Frisbee golf podcast, and then somebody went and created one. So, and that's really what happens a lot of times is I will run into people. There's a guy I had on my show named Jack Reicher, I think is how you pronounce his last name. He does the Darknet Diaries. Gets like 300,000 downloads an episode. And the reason he started his podcast is he liked true crime, and he's kind of into cybersecurity, and hence the opposite side of that is hacking. So he created kind of an NPR style storytelling of hackers. And it's one of those things like, well, the show I wanted to listen to didn't exist, so I made one.
Right.
And I've heard that so many times where we're like, well, the thing I wanted to listen to didn't exist, so I figure I'll start one and see if there are other people that like this kind of content, and then usually they do. So it's pretty cool.
Now, when you first start a podcast, like you said, you go onto forums and stuff, and you a lot of the time get bad information, and you kind of you're intimidated almost to try to start this, because now you're getting into niches. And when it came down to me starting this podcast, I didn't want to be typecasted at all. I didn't want to be put into a box, hence Talking Junk, because this episode right here might not appeal to anybody or everybody, maybe just a bunch, but the next episode might appeal to everybody. You know what I mean? I don't just have one set of people that I have on here. What do you tell somebody that is trying to break into podcasting and really can't figure out their niche?
I say figure out your niche. Let's look at it this way. If I'm reading a book and the first chapter is great, and the second and the third and the fourth are like, or if I'm listening to a new album from an artist and the first song is great, and the second and the third and the fourth are meh, I'm like, all right, am I going to hit play on the sixth? And what it is you're going to end up with a smaller audience, but more loyal. So let's say I do a podcast and it's called Being More Confident. Because who doesn't want to be more confident, right? You're like,
Right.
oh, this is going to apply to everybody. But what if I say being a more confident parent? Oh, okay, I just cut out a bunch of people who don't have kids.
Yeah.
But now I've got some people like, oh, yeah, I mean, I don't know what I'm doing. Then I go, how about being a more confident first-time parent? Ooh, now we cut out some more people, but there are a bunch of people like, he's talking to me. I mean, I don't know what I'm doing. I think I'm going to kill my kid. I've never had one of these things before. There's no manual. You don't have to keep niching down, but let's go one more level. What if I said being a more confident, interracial first-time parent? Now we've got a group of people like, yeah, nobody ever talks about the stuff that we have to go through. I mean, we're
Right.
talking about niches before. Haley Radke does Adoptees On, and it's all about life as a person that's been adopted. And there are people that spend years trying to find their biological parents, and they find them, and it kills me every time I say this. They find their biological parents and get rejected again. And the only people that know what it's like to go through that are people that have gone through that. So she has like a Facebook group and things like that. So it doesn't really matter if you're doing it just for fun, and I want to hang out and get my name out there and network with people and just have a good time on a Friday night.
Right.
Do your thing. It's all about, I always say the first question you have to ask is, why am I doing this? And that could be like, I want to be seen as an expert. I want to talk about Batman in the basement. It could be, I can't get the word out and I've got this cause that I want to do and I want to reach a global audience. It might be, hey, I've got this business I'm starting and I want to attract new customers and I want to network with other people in my industry. So there are all sorts of different reasons and none of those are wrong. And I always say, if you start a podcast and you want to talk about whatever, sci-fi movies or whatever, the minute you hit record and you put it out and you were talking with, you do one with your wife, the minute you put that out, if the goal was to have a podcast and put it out and have fun, congratulations, you have a successful podcast because you did a podcast with your wife and you had fun. So it all comes down to that why. And what I hate to see is so many people think the only way you can measure success is through money. And it's like, no, I mean, I've had all sorts of, the thing that still kind of blows me away is I can be in the most remote part of the country and say, hey, in August, I'm going to be in blah, 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 talking at the blah, blah, blah. If you're around, like, let's do dinner. And I've done that a number of times. And I always think, well, I'm in the middle of nowhere, Alabama, and I'll get an email. Hey, you're going to be right down the street from me. Like, can we really go to dinner? And I was like, I can't believe this. Sure, let's do it. It's great. So there's so many reasons to do it. And, if you want, depending on what your why is, when you niche down, you'll have a smaller but more loyal audience. And that's kind of building a community thing. And that's
like a cult following.
Yeah. But if you just want to hang out and have fun with people, ain't nothing wrong with that either. So, I always tell people a podcast is a recipe. It's not a statue. I have a show I do right now called the Podcast Rodeo Show. And I started it because I wanted to test another system in podcasting. I didn't have time for another show. And I'm like, look, I'm just going to grab a random podcast, listen to it live, and just say what I think about it. So there's no show prep, zero. And then when it's done, it's done. And I've done that, but I don't think it helps my brand. Because what's the reason of that show? The reason of that is to say, hey, here, look, I found some things you can improve about your podcast. If you want me to do a full review, go over here and order one. But
constructive criticism with the option to buy.
Yeah, and what it is because it's off the top of my head. Have you ever been in an argument and you said something off the top of your head and you went, probably should have waited on that one.
Yeah, I should have worded it better.
Yeah, so there are times when I'm not. It's constructive feedback, but it needs a bit of a filter. And so I'm changing that up a bit where I now say you'll get an honest first impression after I take a breath. So you can always change your podcast. You can start in one direction and learn, I've seen people that have they thought they were going to attract audience A, and instead they attracted audience B and they go, well, that's interesting. And at that point, you either A, change your content because you're attracting the wrong people, or you look at who you attracted and go, well, what do these people want to talk about? So you get to change and kind of roll with the punches as you go along.
Now, when you start it, how do you launch it successfully? Now, there are a bunch of streaming websites that you can use to put it out there. Some charge, some don't. Some monetize, some don't. Some offer incentives for monetization, like sponsorships with just little things that you have to do in there.
So let's go back to that word successfully. What is success? How is success defined?
Differently.
Yeah, that's the whole thing. Now, obviously you want to get exposure as much as you can, but I always like to use, I'll try to do this quickly. There's a great example of a movie called The Lone Ranger. It was done back, I think in the late 90s, had Johnny Depp at the height of Johnny Depp. And it was a Disney movie. It had the Happy Meals ready to go. It was tons of exposure, and the movie absolutely just bombed big time. It's one of the top 10 bombs. And the reason for that was the movie sucked. There was nobody walking out of that movie calling their friends going, you got to come see this movie. It was great. Meanwhile, The Sixth Sense was almost an independent movie. M. Night Shyamalan, and everybody that walked out of that movie called a friend and said, hey, you got to come see this movie and I'm going to go with you. So it always comes down to, and I think podcasters are, and I understand this, this is not a put down. It's normal. You just got to get over it. I don't think most people are willing to have somebody do a focus group Like if you're a restaurant, you're not going to open up your restaurant until you have somebody eat your food and tell you if it's good or not. And podcasters like to skip that step because we've been in the kitchen for hours working on this thing. Of course it's good. And it's like, you're a little too close to the tree sometime. So it's, so once you get somebody that's not named Mom or your best friend, Steve or Carol, or somebody that you grew up with to say, yeah, this is good. And this is what I was looking for. And you know that this is going to resonate with an audience. Then you get back to, okay, I can, first of all, I don't understand people that if your audio, list it everywhere. I see people like, oh, I'm just going to do it in Spotify. I'm like, why? Or they'll just,
sense.
Yeah, or they'll do it in Apple. And I'm like, you do realize that around 70% of Europe is on an Android phone. So you better put it in Google Podcasts and Spotify and Ghana and Deezer and iHeart and Odyssey, which is CBS. Just list it everywhere. Why make it hard for your audience to find you? And then, like you said, there's YouTube, there's Twitch, there's Facebook, there's LinkedIn, there's all sorts of places. So any place you can put it, put it. And then, like you said, sometimes you might want to scale it back. I do a live show on Saturday morning. And for the longest time, I've just had YouTube because I didn't want to handle multiple chat boxes going. It got a little crazy. And I was like, well, you know what? If you want to, here it is. Come find me over here. And
which is the beauty of StreamYard, because I have all these streaming platforms we're on right now, and I get one comment box.
Yeah, I love it. So it's that, and then it's the one thing that most people forget, and this is what it sounds like, because when you start to promote yourself, you unfortunately, many of us feel like, I don't know, I'm going to date myself, like an old 70s used car salesman. And this is the guy that's just trying to get you to buy, and he's selling you a bucket of bolts. And the minute you drive it off the lot, it's gone. And my apologies to anybody who sold used cars in the 70s. But anyway, and so somebody will be at the middle of their show or their end, and they'll say something like this. Hey, if you kind of like, wanna, the show, if you wanted, like, you don't have to, but if you want to, you could, like, I don't know, tell somebody about it or something. The website is .com. And they say it so fast, you're like, wait, what was that? And so, but, all right, well, whatever, let's go on. And I'm like, wait, huh? And if you watch, I watch a lot of documentaries of people that are super famous, because I'm like, okay, there's something to learn here. And, oh, crap. I'm drawing a total blank. The one girl that whispers, almost when she sings, Billie Eilish.
Okay.
Taylor Swift, both of those in their concerts will stop. They will just stop the concert and talk to their audience to say, thank you. Are you okay? Basically. And so I always tell people, one of the things you need to do, there's a great book by Eric Newsom, who used to work at NPR. And he said, we're all thinking, I wish I had a team to help promote my show. He goes, you have one. It's called your audience. And so instead of going, hey, if you kind of maybe like want to, what you need,
how you doing?
Yeah, cool. And if you say, hey, I see we're at the 28-minute mark, so obviously you're liking this particular episode. If you know somebody else who would like or needs this content, could you do me a favor? Could you just go to your phone and click on the share button and share that with one person?
Right. Sharing is free.
Yeah, sharing is free. And I've had so many people go, well, it can't be that easy. And I'm like, yeah, just ask your audience, because they like you. And if you remind them to share, I know super popular YouTubers, and they always, subscribe and like the bell and smash that whole 9 yards. And they say, you know why we say that? And I go, why? And I go, because it works. Like, we all know what a subscribe button is when we're watching YouTube, but yet we still have to tell them, hey, subscribe. And if you want to get notified, smash the bell. And so you have to slowly, succinctly, specifically ask your audience to share it.
Now, Dominique here said he's reading through your book now.
Thank you.
It's a good read, he says.
It's what it talks about. Chapter 1 is number 1. When you want to make money from a podcast, it has to be a good podcast. People give value for value. So when you help them out, and the other thing is, some people, especially if the goal is money, they don't think they have any value because they hang out with everybody else that knows the same stuff they do. And they don't realize that what's in their head is something that other people don't. I went to dinner once with somebody and they said something and I'm like, oh man, total Pete Best. And they're like, who's Pete Best? And I go, what? I go, you know who Pete Best? And they're like, no, I've never even heard that name. I go, it's the original drummer of the Beatles. And they're like, where do you get this stuff? And I go, everybody knows who Pete Best is. And she goes, no, nobody knows who Pete Best is. But I grew up around musicians, and we all knew who Pete Best was. So it's one of those things where your knowledge is valuable and people will listen to you. I had a guy right now at the School of Podcasting has flown in 2 wars. He's a pilot. He's a keynote speaker and this and that, but he had a little imposter syndrome. He's up now to about 13 episodes and he's doing great, but we all just think, nobody's going to listen to me, or, I'm not sure if I can do this. And heck, you can get in there. The water's fine.
It sure is. And like you said, podcasts, it's not too late. It's not too late to change your podcast once you start it. Now, we first started, it had a totally different feel for like the first 3 episodes. We were just taking topics. We were sitting around and almost a round table and talking about it. And it didn't work out with the people that I was doing it with. So like you said on, I think it was your latest episode, you said people just assume they have to do interviews now.
Yeah.
And that's where I went. I was like, now I have nobody. I don't know what I'm going to do. I need to start doing interviews. And I mean, I love it. Thank God I started. But ultimately, what I wanted this to be turned into my second podcast, which is The Break Room, coming on tomorrow night. Same channel, same station. We do it every Saturday now, and it's turned into its own little thing, and it has its own little following, and we have people chime in, and it's going great. And who would have thought that one podcast would evolve into 2?
Oh, dude, they're like Lay's potato chips. You can't have just one. It's like, forget about it.
I know my wife gets mad at me now because I be talking about starting so many of them, and none of them get off the ground, but most of them are in the starting position.
Yeah, that's a mistake. I've been there. I have too many now, and people always say, "How do you?" I think I have 4 or 5, and they're like, "How do you do that many podcasts?" I go, "No wife, no kids." I go, "But you've got wife and kids." I'm like, I would stick with 1, maybe 2 if she's in it, which you have.
Yeah.
Because the thing is, we think we can do that because we've gone through the learning curve. You're like, oh, it's easy. I know the software and export and iTunes and Apple and Spotify and blah, it's easy. That's not the hard part. Writing a book is not the hard part. The hard part is getting people to read it. So when you get that second podcast, it's like, oh, now I got to promote it. I have to grow the audience. And that's the part that really that's the hard part. So
very true. And that's where I was just going to get, once you have it planned out, once you have your niche, once you're on your, I guess, distributing website, how do you start growing your baby? Because now you put your heart, your soul, your mind, your sweat, your blood, your tears into this podcast, and you're hoping for it to get to places. But once you start seeing 2, 3 listens, no downloads,
right,
2-3 cents inside the old money jar there for the podcast, it starts to be a little daunting. Like, am I doing the right thing? And most podcasts don't last, 6 months?
Most of them don't make it past episode 7. And the reason for that is they start off and you're going through a learning curve. So it's going to take you longer than you thought to make the show. And so by the time you get to episode 7, you're still spending 8, 9, 10 hours on an episode. And so you're giving a lot of time and you're getting 18 downloads. It's tough when you first start. And that's always tell people, whatever you're talking about, it better be something that you have so much passion about it. You will talk about it for free because you're going to be talking about it for free. It takes a while and nobody wants to hear this. One of the books behind me is Beyond Powerful Radio with Valerie Geller. She's a radio guru. I've talked to Eric K. Johnson, who's a friend of mine. He's another radio guru. It takes about 3 years to grow an audience. And people are like, wait, did you say 3 months? No, 3 years. And you're like, really? I'm like, now, there are people that prove me wrong, maybe 2.5, 2 years. People love to talk about John Lee Dumas, who's a friend of mine, entrepreneur on fire. They go, John was monetizing in 6 months. I go, of a daily show. You do a weekly show. If you take 6 months of a daily show and stretch it out weekly, it's about 2.8 years. So it takes a while. And if you want to monetize, it's not one stream. It might be advertising, for the record. worst way to make money with a podcast. Best way, sell your own stuff. To me, I make also great. Yeah, there you go. And then you get into affiliate stuff. I've done some good stuff with affiliates. Then you get into things like crowdfunding, and the Patreon, the glow.fm, all that kind of stuff. Have
Now,
multiple
Patreon. I don't mean to cut you off. Patreon is a little. It's like it's scary at first because you don't know what your price is. You don't know what to offer. You don't know what they're gonna want ultimately,
right,
and who's gonna pay for it.
Right. So that's why you don't do it.
Right.
Because what's the point? Why spend the time figuring out the thing? This is where I see a lot of people. They're like, hey, if I get to this goal on Patreon, I'll buy a new microphone. And I'm like, is your sound bad? No. Is your audience saying, wow, your sound is awful? No. And who benefits from that goal? You do. So, I talk about it in the book. Jonathan Oakes does a show called Trivia Warfare. And people kept saying, how do I get on the show to play? Like, I know trivia too. I want to play some of you guys. And he went, I have something my audience wants. So he made up a Patreon level that was, for X amount of money, you can actually get on the show. And then he had another one where, like once a quarter, they come up with different ideas for the show. And if for a certain level, you can be part of that show. For another level, you can be involved and actually bring up the ideas. Like we can bring your idea into the show. Right. So he found things that the audience wanted and brought it in. So,
but first you have to have an audience.
At first you have to have an audience. Yeah. You cannot monetize dust. And the other thing that I interviewed a woman from Teachable, and Teachable is a product where you can sell courses and things like that. And I think she quoted 2%, and I said 3 to 4. And she goes, oh, you're generous. And what I mean by that is if I have 100 people listening to my show on a regular basis, 3 to 4 of them are going to sign up for your bonus content. And it sucks. It's the truth. It is. And it is what it is. And people are like, well, why is that? I'm like, because we're used to free stuff. And it's the diehard fans that are like, and that's where the word Patreon comes from, the word patron. And back in the day, people would just give Beethoven and Mozart and all those people, here's some money because we want you to do more of your stuff. So that's
why most bags back then said, thank you for your patronage.
Yeah, exactly. So it's Patreon, glow.fm, things like that come in handy when your show doesn't fit a product. Like if I'm doing a running show, I can sell shoes. I can get hey, here's this and things like that. But if my show is interviewing interesting people with interesting stories, there's no like, here, buy a can of interesting, buy one, get one free. So what fits with that? Then you're like, hey, if you want more interesting stories, then sign up here and you can get an additional bonus. There's a great website called Graphtreon. So it's GRAPH Treon, TREON.com. And it's somehow tied into the back end of Patreon. And if you in Patreon, you can say, yeah, go ahead and show my stats to the world. And there are people making hundreds of thousands of dollars a month. And then you look and you see, oh, they've been doing this, 6-7 years and things like that. But it's an alternative when somebody's like, I can't find a sponsor that really fits. I don't sell my own products. And like, well, here's one way you can try, it's always.
And when you want to get off the ground and try to get sponsorships early on with no minimum listenership, it's very hard. Like I started it too, and I got into getting local breweries to give me a bottle of their stuff, and I would drink it on camera. Now I just buy my liquor because I'm not going through that again. A lot of distilled stuff is
well, and I talk about that in the book.
Wheels.
I talk about that in the book. I'm like, when you first start off, don't even sniff because the first step is I got to grow this audience. And if I know I'm only going to monetize maybe 5% of that, it's got to be a bigger audience than I think. And it depends. Again, if I have a show that's, about, I don't know, colon cancer, right? Okay. Now we have a super tight niche. And if I've got a company that has some sort of medicine made for this, you can go, I have your target audience here, and you can charge more for that. So, but if it's a show, where your audience isn't really defined. Yeah, it's kind of, some younger people, some old people, some women, some not, some whatever. It's like, that's hard to monetize. That's when you get into things like mattresses because everybody sleeps, and, water because everybody needs water. It gets tough.
Now, how would you say is the best way to grow your audience?
First I would go to schoolofpodcasting.com/grow. And I've got 30 strategies there because a lot of them are really simple. But the first thing first is, again, make sure, take that time and get somebody not named Mom to listen to your show. Right. But you can do episode swaps. So you can reach out to another show. And this is where a lot of people are like, wait, you want me to promote my competition? And I'm like, it's not competition because we're not radio. We're not both on at 7:30 in the morning. You can listen to me on Monday. You can listen to Jason on Tuesday. So
correct. Or you can listen to me on Monday after you listen to Dave.
There you go. Exactly. Having guests on your show, because you talked about, doing interviews are great. Now, interviews are not this giant 10,000 viewer download switch. And I don't expect my guests to share the show. This is the way I look at it, and it's just an opinion. I think the job of the guest is to bring content and be entertaining, right, and get my audience to stick around. I do make it super easy for them to share it. And if they do, God bless them. If they don't, it's cool. But I give them a link to the episode. I give them a link to anything to share it. I pre-write the tweet, because in some cases, people record a bunch ahead of time and they're like, hey, our episode is out. And you're like, that was 2.5 months ago. I don't remember what the heck we talked about. So just make it super easy to share. Because when you do interviews, you grow your network. When you do a solo show and you just talk to your audience, you're growing your influence. And so I always say do a little bit of both. But interviews can help. If there is, let's pretend there's not a pandemic going on. This is a great strategy. If there's a trade show about your industry. So a friend of mine, Glenn the Geek, he has a website, horseradionetwork.com. It has like 16 shows all about horses.
For a second there, I got scared. I thought we was going back to Tijuana and there was some donkey shows on there.
And so, but Glenn went to like the largest horse trade show and said, I want to be your official podcast for the show. And here's what I'm going to do. All you have to do is give me a table there, like a vendor. I'll pay to get myself there. And what I want to do is I want to interview all of your speakers so we can talk about the show, what they're going to do, what they're going to speak about. So we're going to build up a lot of buzz because I've got your target audience, horse people, about this horse event. All I need is a booth. And so they're like, okay, first year they gave him like a booth in the back, nowhere. So he interviews all of the speakers. What is he doing? He's growing his network and he's getting, future guests to do a deep dive. Then he goes to the vendors and like, hey, tell us a little bit about your product. And they're like, what do you do again? He goes, oh, I do a podcast for horse people. And they're like, oh, how much is it to advertise on your show? I was like, dude, that is so brilliant. And so now he's done that every year. They give him a booth right up front. He brings microphones. He doesn't record anything, but it looks cool. And he's got a backdrop. And he said probably 70% of his sponsors come from that show because they see that whole. So that's one. I've known a few people. We call it Glenn the Geek. What'd you do? I Glenn the Geeked it because he was like the guy that first did that. So find a show that's, something that ties in with your show and go there and try to be the official podcast of that. Make sure you have an easy way to follow or subscribe to your show. I always hate to hear people say, oh, just find me wherever fine podcasts are made, because especially Apple and Spotify have horrendous, and I mean bad, like horrible, all caps, bold, double underline search. So
there are some podcasts actually have the same name, and it makes it harder for you to be found. Now that I have that problem with my Saturday night podcast, there's a bunch called The Break Room. And there are a couple out there called Talking Junk, but I dare you to Google me. I'm the first page, the whole page.
Nice.
How that happened, I have no idea.
And there, that's it. Well, and I always laugh because I think there are about 27 shows named Thinking Outside the Box. And I go, apparently you don't think outside the box when it comes to naming your show. Nobody did a quick Google search.
No, they didn't.
Yeah. I mean, and there are tons, like make sure in your email signature that there's a link to your show. That's an easy one to do. You can, when you use social media, people always go, I wish I had a team that would help me grow my audience. Well, again, that's your audience. That's your team. And so instead of saying, hey, episode 14's out, well, that doesn't make me want to click. But if you say, hey, do you know somebody who wants to start a podcast? Share this episode with them. Now you're saying, hey, sales team, here's some marketing material for you. Because in reality, it's cool that they watch and listen to your show. But what we really want them to do, because it's like we're preaching to the choir. They know about our show. We want them to share it with their audience because their audience may not know about it. So instead of, hey, episode 27's out of the blah, blah, blah show, it's like, tell them who to share this with. And that will, it's more of a, again, it's more of a rifle shot than a shotgun. But you're going to get better return on that. Let's see what else here. Make it easy for people to share your show on your website. We talked about sharing that in an app. Another one that I see a lot of people just completely blow, and I swear a tear comes down from my eye, is your headlines. So again, if you think about it, when you go to your show in the app, your name is typically at the top of the page when you find your show.
Right.
So there's no reason to put, hey, School of Podcasting interview with Jason, because if you can see School of Podcasting, the name's already at the top of the page. I don't have to put School of Podcasting again, but they think, oh, I need to put the name there because it's in the title. And I'm like, no, not really.
Just click on the show, look for your episode.
Yeah. So instead, and the other thing that some people, this is one of those things you need a cage match. I don't put episode numbers at the beginning of my title.
I don't put episode numbers anymore.
Bingo. And that's for me. I'm like, if you have to do it, put them at the end. And all I do is I type, here's my way. I'm like, here, you tell me which one would you click on? Here's just the title with an eye-catching, extra, Dave Jackson helps you, blah, blah, blah. Or episode 16, Dave Jackson. Oh, that's right. You ran out of room. Sorry. Because you had to put the episode name in there. So, I've seen people that have, like in some cases, tripled their downloads because they used to have the name of the show and then episode 15. And I was like, no. First of all, we don't need the name of the show, and nobody's Googling episode 15. Let's get some keywords in there.
I used to do the same thing.
Yeah. So it's an easy one to, you see somebody doing, you're like, oh, that's how I do that. If you've got time, write good show notes. I actually switched my kind of workflow about probably 5 years ago. And that is, I used to write down 4 bullet points or 5 bullet points. I would talk to my invisible friend across the desk. I would record it, I would edit it, and I would upload it. And as I was uploading it, I would then kind of write a blog post about what I just said. And inevitably, I kept coming up with the 5th bullet point. I'm like, oh, I should have mentioned this. So now what I do is I write a blog post and I really try to figure out what the heck am I trying to say? What's the one thing I want my audience to take away? And so I write the blog post. I take the blog post. I write down 4 or 5 bullet points, and then I talk to my invisible friend across the desk. And so that helps me kind of flesh out what I'm trying to say, but it also then gives Google something to find. So it doesn't have, some people like, you need 1,000 words. So I'm like, okay, you need at least 300 words to help describe, what people are going to get when they click on
keep
play.
It short and simple.
Yeah. There are all sorts of other ways in terms of SEO. You want to make sure to have the alt tags on your images. You can anything.
Yeah, hashtags are a big thing now, and I still sometimes can't really figure them out. But when it comes to sharing, Jasmine said in the comments, QR codes.
Oh yeah.
Now, she did tell me about it, and you can get your custom QR code. There's plenty of sites that do it for free.
Got one on the back of my business card. So.
Got mine right there.
There you go. Absolutely.
And it's simple. You just put your website on there, which would be another big thing. And I kicked myself in the ass when I heard your podcast. I was like, I know Dave's going to ask me how's your website? No, I don't have a website. I'm still using Linktr.ee. But see, that's another thing I need. I need the sound effects.
Yeah. Yeah, the reason for now, Linktree isn't bad. It's just, to me, whatever you do on Linktree, you could do on your website.
Right.
And then you could just tell people, hey, go to schoolofpodcasting.com/subscribe. And by not having a website, what happens is because I'm old and I've been around a while, before Facebook, there was a website called mp3.com, and there were people making a serious living on mp3.com. It was one of the biggest websites at the time, and it was mainly musicians. And then people started putting music that they didn't have rights to. So they just started sharing music on it. And all these musicians just kept saying, oh, it's easy. Just go to, mp3.com/Dave. You'll see my stuff. That they were using that as people call that building your house on rented land. And all of a sudden,
almost like SoundCloud.
Yeah, exactly.
Online demos.
Yeah. So what happened was mp3.com got sued, and sold and sued and sold and sued and sold. And so all these people that never had their own domain name, it doesn't even have to be a website, just buy a domain name. That's like $12 a year. So that if anything happens, MySpace, right now people are leaving Facebook like it's on fire. They know where to find you. Oh, right. I just need, okay. So Dave's no longer an Apple Podcast. I don't know what's going on. Oh, I know where to go. Go to schoolpodcasting.com. He can find his, there's probably a message there at the top or something going on. So that's really where it comes into play, is by having your website. I always say your website is your main hub. That is where people know that's your headquarters. And then your podcast, your Instagram, your TikTok, everything else is just a little satellite office that circles around that. But all those point back to your website. And that's where you're selling your merch and building your newsletter and whatever else you got going on.
Now, what are some podcast myths that we could debunk?
If you build it, they will come. That's the big one. And a lot of people think it's the technology. Like what you need, ditch that Blue Yeti and get yourself a Samson Q2U. Now, this will make you sound a whole lot better, which it will, by the way.
Okay, yeah. I like my my Yeti, but
this is USB as well, and you'll have a lot less room noise. And
what does that run for?
About $70.
Oh, it's cheaper than the Yeti.
Yeah. This is what I do. I help people save. I always tell people I help you sound like $1 million without spending $1 million. And so, and the Blue Yeti it's a great example of poor journalism, because people just said, hey, write a story about podcast gear. So they Googled it, and whoever wrote the first article said the Blue Yeti. And the Blue Yeti can be a great microphone. I have a friend of mine that has one on a boom arm. It's about 1.5 inches from his face. He's got a pop filter on it. Sounds great, but nobody's using it like that.
Well, so now, we can use it however you want it. However.
So that's one myth. You can make money from day one. That's not a myth. You can sign up on some of these places and they will insert ads, usually for their own service. And when I researched that, I was earning 0.0017 cents per download. So, yep, yeah. I was making money. But when I did my 18 downloads or whatever I was getting for my first episode.
Every 2 months, you can get a tank of gas.
Well, if that, if you take 0.0017 and you multiply that by 300 downloads, you get 51 cents.
And this is assuming you're even getting that many downloads.
Right. That's 300 downloads. A lot of people, when they first start off, get 13, 20 if you got the cousins listening.
Right.
It takes a while. What other myths? The one that I see a lot now, in full disclosure, I work for Libsyn. It's a podcast media hosting company, and I'm sure they love it when I say this. I don't want to say it doesn't matter who your media host is, but what I do want to say is if you have bad content on media host A and you move to media host B, that's like saying, hey, I'm going to take that Lone Ranger movie that we're talking about, and I saw it on a big screen. I'm going to put it now in the DVD player and watch it in the living room.
Well, that works sometimes.
Well, now I can fast forward. That's the bonus.
Sometimes it doesn't work in the movies, but when it goes on DVD, it gets what we referred to earlier as a cult following.
Yeah, that's
then
true.
You got those diehard fans that'll do any and everything to get what they need for their fix.
Yeah, that's true. So again, you're going to get that cult following, but in terms of like, with podcasting, at least, just the media host, it will make, it's the interface. If you're constantly looking for things, you don't know what's going on, that's going to be frustrating. But if you have a media host with the right features that are going to help you grow your audience, that's going to make things easier. But I see people like, well, I'm on Spreaker and I'm thinking of moving to whoever, Captivate, Buzzsprout, Libsyn, Blueberry, you know, I want to grow my audience. And like, that's not really going to grow your audience. If you take one engine out of out of this red Corvette and you put it in a blue Corvette,
it's not going to make it faster.
It's the same engine. Yeah. So that's another myth I see. Oh, what else? You'll get a lot of trolls. You will get a lot of trolls on YouTube. Podcasting, not to say that you won't get trolls, but I have both a YouTube channel and podcasts, and I'm here to tell you, you better bring an extra layer of skin.
Oh, trolls know what they get when they come on this YouTube page.
But you'll definitely get more feedback on YouTube.
Live on camera.
Yeah, and with podcasting, if people don't like your show, it's kind of like when you go to a restaurant and the food was kind of cold and the waitress was slow and whatever else, and you go up to the cash out line and they go, "How was everything?" And you go, "Fine," and then you never come back again. Yeah, and so when people don't like your show, they just leave. They don't come back.
Right. So how can you keep your audience more engaged?
Live, breathe, eat, and sleep with them. So
I don't think my wife would like the last one.
No, yeah. I'll give you an example of an easy one to do. Find a topic that your show is about.
Right.
So for me, I could go into Amazon and look for shows on podcasting. And then what I'm going to look for are the reviews. And I'm going to look for a 2-star review and a 4-star review. Why? Because that person is going to say, I would have given you a 5-star review, but you did this, or you didn't do this. When it's a 1-star review, it's like, hey, you know what? This is pretty awful. I would have given you a 1-star review, but you did talk about this. So I gave you a 2. So they're a little more specific. YouTube, again, go to YouTube, not to watch the video, but find a channel that's similar to the stuff you're talking about. And there are tools you can use to kind of see what their top videos are. So you're like, oh, well, this topic was really popular, but you can also then go to the comments and see, oh, I was hoping you were going to talk about such and such. You didn't do the blah, blah, blah. Or somebody like, I'm so glad you finally mentioned this and that. So you get some feedback on what that audience is looking for. And so when you know what your audience wants, you can give it to them. I mean, have you ever had the joy of participating at work, some sort of like Secret Santa?
Yes.
And they go, no gift cards. And you're like, what? No gift cards? Come on. And so then you pull your name and you're like, ah, crap. I don't even know Harold in accounting. I got Harold in accounting. Ah, good God. All right, whatever. So what do? I don't know Harold. So I go to somebody in accounting. I'm like, hey, don't tell him, but I got Harold in the Secret Santa thing. Like, do you know what he wants? They're like, oh, he's a huge Philadelphia Eagles fan. If you could get him like a jersey of like the quarterback, he would go nuts. He's an absolute, like, just crazy about the Philadelphia Eagles. So you go to the store, you buy a thing, you give it to Harold. You don't know Harold. You're like, hey, I was your Secret Santa. He's like, oh, nice to meet you. He opens it up. And he's like, oh my God, would you be my Secret Santa every year?
You did your homework.
Yeah. So it's a matter of who is my audience? What do they want? Why do they want to listen to this show? Is there something that they're trying to figure out? Or are they trying to, whatever it is? And so that's part of it. And then do things that big shows can't. So if somebody emails me, I email them back. And this is where, Jason, you know that I know that you know that I know that you put your pants on one leg at a time, right? We're like, it just happens to be that we're on this side of the mic.
Right.
But when you get an email from, oh my gosh, the host emailed me back, the big shows don't do that. They have teams of 18, but they're not replying directly back to their audience. And
Nobody
so,
is.
yeah, and those are the things. So now, and what I always do is somebody goes, hey, I really liked episode number 820, whatever, when you did the thing that was really cool. And I'll email back, hey, thanks so much. Was that your favorite part of that episode, or was there something else you wanted to see? Also, is there anything you would want me to talk about in the future? Sometimes I'm doing a show this week that's based on a feedback from an email. I said, hey, is there anything you'd like me to talk about? And they always say, oh crap, you have 800 episodes out. You've probably talked about it. I'm like, no, really, whatever it is, let me know, because I may not have. And somebody sent me, I'm like, that's a good topic. And then they freak out. They're like, wait, if I ask you to do something, like, you'll actually do it? And I'm like, well, yeah, if I think it's good for my audience. And they're like, holy, now that's like this whole thing, because they kind of feel like they're connected. It's not,
Right.
it's
Like
no
they have a
longer,
hand in it. They're part of the team.
yeah, it's not Dave's show. It's my show. I can actually steer this thing in some ways. So that's one you can do. I go into Facebook groups a lot and try to give good advice. There's a lot of really bad advice in Facebook groups. I go to Reddit sometimes and look, in many cases, just to see what people are talking about. When I go to Clubhouse, and I'm not a huge fan of that as much as it was when it was in the early stages, but I don't go there to try to get on stage and go, hey, I'm Dave Jackson, I'm a podcast guy. I just go to listen. What are people talking about? Because if they're talking about it on Clubhouse, then they're going to want to hear about it on a podcast. So it really does kind of boil down to who's my audience, what do they want to talk about, what's going to keep them. And then the kind of bumper sticker answer is I took a week once and just wrote down everything I watched, read, or listened to. And then I asked myself, why did I watch, read, or listen to that? And it was a matter of it either made me laugh, cry, think, groan, because we all have those things you hate watch. You're like,
Right.
oh, I can't, this guy's such an idiot. I'm like, you're still watching. You know, if you show up every week, buddy, guess what? Bitch, you're a fan, you know? So
most definitely.
Yeah,
Which is
so-
what I'm saying to most WWE fans right now.
yeah, so I laugh, cry, think, groan, educate, or entertain. And if you can do multiples of those, like I love John Oliver on HBO does Last Week Tonight. And he's covering stuff that should be on the mainstream news and it's not. And then he's a comedian, so they're making jokes about these really serious subjects. And so I'm getting educated, I'm laughing, and many times I'm groaning because I'm like, wait, our government is doing what? And so, and that's the stuff you then tell somebody else. I'm like, I was watching this thing last night. Did you know that blah, 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 you know, so.
Yeah, kind of like the proverbial water cooler talk.
Yeah, exactly. And so when you can, and 70% of podcasts are discovered not by being in the right category in Apple or Spotify. They're discovered by their friends talking about it.
Yeah.
Or
word of
by
mouth.
other people. Yeah, word of mouth is like 70%. So you just have to come up with content that is so good. And this is not easy, by the way. It's so good your friends can't help but talk about it. There's a video on YouTube from like the 50s where back then they didn't have 24-hour TV and they used to play the Pledge of Allegiance. And there's this black and white video that shows there's like subliminal messages in this thing. And when you watch it, you're like, wait, what? No. And then you watch it like, holy crap, there's subliminal messages in this thing. And you have to tell somebody.
Yeah, it's kind of like when you slow down Disney and you see all those
Yeah.
windows in there.
Exactly. Then you
Yeah,
have to tell somebody.
You think
So-
twice about letting your kids watch it. Well, maybe you should think twice about letting your kids watch this, but don't think twice about letting your kids watch the School of Podcasting, especially if they're on TikTok or Instagram and they want to be a face out there and influence, because podcasting is one of the ways to do it. And Dave right here, Mr. 20-year podcaster, nearly, he'll show you how to do it.
Yeah, that's what I do, man. I love it. There's nothing more than my favorite story is I had somebody that called me up and she said, I need to start a podcast, but I hate technology and I'm never going to be able to do it. And I was like, all right, challenge accepted. And I baby stepped her through it. And I remember because she called me up, her name was Marcy Rosenbaum, and she called me up crying. And I'm like, Marcy, what's the matter? She's like, I'm in iTunes. And I go, yeah, I told you, we submitted it the other day. It'd take a couple days and they'd approve it. And she goes, I know, but I'm in iTunes. And I was like, and she's like, I told you I couldn't do it. And you said I could, and I did it. I'm in iTunes. So that kind of stuff just blows me away. I love to take people that like, oh, nobody's going to listen to me. And I'm like, I think they will. Here's some things you can do. Let's try this and that. So
It
yeah,
feels good to go into your streaming service and look and see other countries are actually listening to you.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it feels real good.
It's crazy, man. And you're like, wait, I'm big in Istanbul? Really? Wow. Okay.
Yeah, like who the hell listens to me in Israel?
I'm still
You
trying to
ain't hear
get
my damn mouth.
I'm still trying to get somebody in Antarctica. I have no listeners in Antarctica. I don't know that they have the internet up there. So maybe someday. A little cold.
Maybe. I mean, hey, if they can hear Talking Junk from Malta to Singapore, you can definitely get into Antarctica. Who knows? Somebody got a satellite radio up there picking up.
That's
something.
it. Elon Musk will get something going on up there.
Oh, he definitely will. Once we get past that ice barrier.
That's it.
But I don't want to take up too much of your time. I know you are a very busy man with your 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 podcasts. I do want to thank you for coming on, though. You've been a great guest, a very informative guest. Sometimes I stumble on my words, but thank you very much for coming on, and we got to try to have you on another episode.
Absolutely. You don't have to twist my arm too hard to come and have fun, talk some junk. So Jason, I really appreciate the opportunity to come out, hang out, and best of luck with you going forward, buddy.
Well, thank you. And before we go, we want to get you to go on to that where is it? I have it up here somewhere. Go to schoolofpodcasting.com/start, and you will go straight on to the Start Your Podcast Today page and get all those nice little tips there from Dave. You see, look at the podcast award. He's in the Hall of Fame, which is where we are planning to be.
There you go.
Tune in every week. We have great guests like Dave on. You can also tune into the break room every Saturday night. Tomorrow night, we are going to have a preview of a Phoenix MC battle. So we'll have some MCs on, and we'll see who's the best MC. Dave, again, we want to thank you for coming on. You've been a wonderful guest. What more can I say? But time to take your asses back to school.
Thank you, my friend. I deeply appreciate it.
Thank you. And before I forget, make sure that if you know somebody who's into podcasting and maybe would want to start taking a look at the School of Podcasting, you go straight to Amazon or wherever books are sold, and you pick up this little gem. Profit from your podcast, proven strategies to turn listeners into a livelihood, which is, again, what we're trying to do. So you heard Dave say it, word of mouth, share this bitch, like this bitch, comment on every single video. Thank you very much, Dave. Have a great night, listeners, junkers. I'll see you tomorrow night in the break room.